Hi, Donald.
Hey, Peter. All right, so here we are.
I know I
So,
wish we were in person, but we'll take what we can get these days.
yeah. So, so this idea of our having a conversation that was unmoderated, that we get to create the questions and for each other. Uh, I think I like the idea. I don't think I came up with it. Maybe I did. It was a good idea, but
I think you did come up with it actually, and I like it too.
so how should we start? Do you want to go first? Just to kind of break the, I mean, I don't know. How should we begin?
Yeah, I'll go first. I mean, first of all, I think you and I can both answer this question, but you and I have known each other for decades.
Yeah.
We met, I mean, you tell the story, but we met on the subway, right? Wasn't that where we had a first meaningful conversation? You take it from here, I'll jump in.
Yes, I had gone to a performance of City Ballet, and it was a Robbins work that I had not ever seen. I'd seen, but not in video, but not live. And it was the first piece on the program, and so it was in silence. I don't remember which one it was. It's like Moves, or is that what it
Yeah,
might be? Oh,
moves.
Moves. So, and it was first on the program. You were in it. You danced. It was the only thing on the program that I wanted to see because I'd been earlier in the week, and so I'd seen some of the other things already on there, so I didn't want to see them again. So I left after the first piece. My favorite thing to do was to go to City Ballet on
So
Sunday.
did I.
So I leave. As I'm going to the subway, there you are, going into the subway as well. So I stopped you and I said, "Hi, my name is blah blah blah. I just saw your dance. I really admire you. You're really terrific." And blah blah blah. And you were very pleasant and you're very receptive to it. And it was like you were pleasantly surprised that somebody liked your dancing. That's how it came across. I mean, it may not. I mean, I know you have more confidence than that, but it
It
felt.
was so rare that I got those compliments. So thank you. Listen, I know we're here to talk about race. I've gotten us sort of on a tangent already. Um, Tell me about you growing up, and then maybe I'll do the same. But how did race manifest itself to you growing up, and racism in the
uh,
various cities, in a number of cities?
Yeah, it was always present. You know, it was spoken and it was unspoken. I grew up in Florida, in the Jim. It was a Jim Crow era, uh, and so I was born in 1949, and so uh, in a southern state like Florida, it was kind of always racism was ever present. Uh, my I was got very early on. I got kind of careful instructions about how to behave around white people if I was unfortunate enough to run into one, which is because I lived in a segregated community, and so the thing was to avoid white people, you know, at all costs, you know, and so it was always there, and there were stories of an uncle of mine and uncles, a couple of uncles who had avoided being lynched, and primarily because the town that my part of my family was from was a town called Perry, and in Perry, the town was actually my great grandmother was biracial, and so she had white relatives in the town, and they kind of protected her, and so if it was her children or grandchildren, they when the Klan was riding, as it was called, they would make sure to alert her and say, "Get Melvin and out of town, and get who was at jail," which was her youngest son, my great grandmother Ada, get them out of town. And so it was always there, taking trips, making sure uh, uh, that this, noticing that the sign said colored and white, and that not to use the wrong one or the wrong not drinking fountain or the bathroom, and just really being cautious, knowing and hearing, traveling, being prepared to be stopped by cops, you know, by patrolmen of some sort because we were Black. And yeah, so it was kind of always there, you know.
So Donald, the talk that you got, I mean, you outlined the talk that happens today and has happened for the past couple of decades in SHOT, the talk that parents will give to a child, particularly a boy, but I assume it's to a growing up a young male and a young female in a family. What was the talk that you received about your safety and how to play situations if you were in an encounter?
Yeah, I mean, basically the talk was to avoid encounters at all
Okay.
costs. And if you did, then the thing that you did not want to appear to be was uppity. And so that I was taught that you were supposed to behave in a very subversive, is that the word? Not subversive, submissive way, that you kind of, what's the word I'm looking for? Obsequious. You were to be obsequious. And so that's basically the talk that I remember getting about how to behave. And so, and I think my generation was one of the first, or maybe it was the first, not where people, when I would see my grandfather, I was raised by my grandparents, when I would see him behaving a certain way, which he often I did not see, but when I saw it, it was kind of like, what is this? Because that him behaving in a manner that was unfamiliar to me, that I thought was not an indication of who he was, and it would make me angry.
So he would be behaving in a way that was this sort of more submissive way?
Yeah. I mean, it's just like the talk that happens in Shaw. The point was to get home alive. And so you did whatever you needed to do to kind of like minimize the contact and to make sure that you were able to walk away from it uninjured and alive. So in a sense, it felt like you were in a terrorist state, or you were in a police state.
You were scared, of course.
There's always this sense of fear. I mean, I think my parents did a really good job of protecting me from it. So it wasn't like I felt it all the time, but I knew it was there and stuff, and about needing to be cautious and careful. But the important thing was that the goal was, I think inside my family, the goal was to make sure that my life was going to be very different than the one they had. And so part of that was I needed to get out. And the way of getting out was actually through education. That generation of people Black people believed in education. And so.
So college got you out, or dance got you out, or both?
What got me out was, so I don't know if you know this, I studied most of my teenage years, I studied classical music. And I was really good at it. And so that got me out. That was one of the things that got me out. And then also I tested well. So I got very good on standardized tests. I did really well. And so when I was 14, I was approached by this woman, Phyllis Buzansky, who said that she was part of a group of people called the College Fund, and that part of how they operated was they identified young Black kids starting around 14 years old that they would tutor to ensure or to optimize the chances of them getting into one of the elite colleges and universities. So that's what did it. And then I got out because I went to one of those elite, or two of those elite colleges and universities.
So it's interesting. I'm sorry, I'm taking all the questions. You're going to have your turn in a moment. But the environment you grew up in, you knew that the KKK was riding not far away. So you had examples of racism so severe. And then you had Phyllis, whose last name I forgot, who is a very different example, but also reiterating a racism in a way, wanting to navigate a racism.
Well, I mean, I think with Phyllis, I think Phyllis's father had been Phyllis was Jewish, Phyllis Buzansky. She was Jewish, and her father, they were from Hartford, Connecticut, and her father had tutored Jewish boys to get into Ivy League schools when there was a quota on Jews in those institutions.
Mm-hmm.
And so she kind of took on a version of that that was her mantle. And I mean, she was extraordinary. And she, she tutored a whole bunch of people. I think there were like, I don't know how many in each class. There weren't many, 5 or something like that at tops, or 7.
I hope she lived long enough to see what you did with your life. She would have been very proud, I know.
Yeah, she died. I don't know. She died when I was doing The Color Purple, when The Color Purple was on Broadway.
Okay. I reached out to you a while ago, and I was going to tell you what your answer was. You wrote it. It was an email, but you said, in spite of living in a sphere of craziness, chaos, and uncertainty, I found pockets of inspiration and optimism. For that, I am grateful.
I said that? I wrote
You
that?
said that.
That's pretty
Yes. It's pretty good, yeah. But Phyllis Kazansky is giving me a pocket of optimism, even though it was a long time ago. But to know that people like that are out there.
Yeah. So I have a question. I mean, you're asking me about my background. And I kind of mentioned this to you the other day. But you grew up in Bedford, New York, right?
Yeah.
And you were at SAB, which is the School of American Ballet, which is the academy associated with New York City Ballet. And so I have a question around growing up in that environment and being at SAB. When did you notice that your world was insular, privileged, and as one of my dancers calls it, super white?
Well, I mean, I don't know if you know Bedford. It's a really interesting town. I think, my mom came over from England. She was born there. And my family background, there was considerable wealth because of Cadbury chocolates, which is part of a lineage. There's more to the family than that, but that's the part that people tend to, it does identify me as a white person just coming to this country, first generation after my mother from England, and having considerable wealth and privilege. Bedford was full of that. We could live in that town in a big white house on a nice road with lots of land, and everybody else had a big white or a big yellow or a big blue house with lots of land, and you don't know anything else really, because I would go over to friends' houses and they had the same house. So I was in this dome of white privilege. I think there's a couple things that made me realize that this wasn't the entire world. And as you might imagine, in a white privileged family, there were really 2 women that helped to raise me, both Black women. One lived in the neighboring town of Mount Kisco, which was where so many of the workers lived that worked on the houses in Bedford. That's where the plumber would be, and the groundskeeper, and the manicurist, and the child care giver. So one lived there, and the other lived in Mount Vernon, which was closer to New York City. And because of the nature of my family, my parents were away a lot on the weekends, as was my sister. So I would go and I would stay with these 2 women on the weekends. And one of them used to take me each weekend to the Bethel Baptist Church in Mount Kisco. And I would sit with her in the church, and I was the only white person in the church. And this was at, age 6, 7, 8, 9, and 10. I would go to the church all the time with her. And I wouldn't even sit with her because she was in the choir. But it was the first time that I had a window into another world. It wasn't to me a world that was less, because Bethel Baptist Church on Sunday everybody is dressed to the nines. It's like a parade. It's like a celebration. It was the most joyous gathering to be in. And people were so good about taking me in and making sure I was okay, because I wasn't sitting with my nanny at the time. But I think the perspective helped a little white privileged boy growing up, because and I even think, these 2 women really helped to raise me. And I think the dialogues that I shared with them were eye-opening to a very small extent. I'm not going to pretend like my eyes have been opened because, I went to a school that was, you know, we wore jackets and ties every day. There was, it's basically a white school. I mean, you wouldn't see exclusively white. And then, as you alluded to, School American Ballet, my first ballet class, you know, it didn't occur to me until I was just thinking recently that there was not a Black child in that ballet class. There were 25 of us, and there wasn't one. So I wasn't seeing the room in that way. I wasn't seeing me in that way as you know, and then I think with the School of American Ballet and also the diversity of New York City in general, I think that shifted quickly. I would be in classes with more diverse classes as I grew older, but you know, always numbers that I could count on one hand.
So in that environment, so in the ballet environment, that did you believe, as a result of what your experiences were, that ballet was white, and that it was supposed to be white?
You know, I don't even think that I mean, it feels like the dumbest answer, but I don't think I asked myself that question. I mean, just like I didn't ask, how does the rest of the world live? I mean, I think growing up, you know, the other part of it was that my mom had lived in so many countries. She lived in Jamaica for a number of years. She lived in Haiti because of her parents' work for a number of years, Sri Lanka, which I know you visited. So, and my grandmother, when she bought dolls for the daughters to play with, always made sure that the dolls were either brown or, you know, light brown or black or pink, or she had the whole array for them. She would hand paint them if she couldn't find enough that were brown. So there was that awareness, but I think at the School of American Ballet, the awareness was slow. I think, you know, it came in at an older age when, you know, there were friendships, and then people started to have a dialogue sort of tentatively about how they felt. You would see your Black friend navigate towards the other Black friend, and you could see a bonding that you realized that they both felt alone and that there weren't other people that they could talk to about things that they might have been experiencing in the ballet studio or when the casting went up for the Nutcracker. And that's when the awareness started to come to me. But I really feel in a lot of ways, I didn't ask myself the questions. And I think I can trace that all the way to today. I didn't ask myself the right questions. Just didn't.
Should I ask you, or do you have one for me?
Oh, my turn?
It's up to you.
Yeah. Yeah, so I wanted to build on that, the pockets of inspiration and optimism, because I think this is such a truly extraordinary time, but I do think today there are these pockets of inspiration and optimism. And I wanted to know from you, what makes you say that? What do you see? What are they to you?
So when did I write that? I'm kind of curious about that. Do you have a date?
Yeah, I wrote it earlier this month. I just reached out to say, I think June 4th.
Okay.
How are you doing? What's going on? Let's have lunch. And then I said, I hope, you know, I hope you're doing well in this time. So.
Well, I think, I mean, one of the things is that doing is really important to me. If I'm doing something, then I don't have time to be pessimistic. I don't have time, as they say in 12 Steps program, I don't have time to sit on the pity pot. I have to kind of, because I'm doing something. And so I think around the time that I wrote that, in particular, I think I was in the middle of doing some exploration with the staff at Spectrum, and I was so engaged by that, around the positiveness of it. And so I think also what I'm seeing with the demonstrations, for example, right now, is that watching, it doesn't feel like it's a passing thing, that there's some transformation that's happening, and that I'm optimistic in that if that can be, there can be follow-up on that in terms of how what people do, what their actions are. And then maybe some of this stuff that I've always hoped for and wished for in my life would be in Black people's life in America, that those things might finally start to happening. And so one of the things, I don't remember where I said it in some interviews somewhere, I said, when I was younger, I used to think, I would watch how people behave, how white people would behave, and I would think, well, one day they're going to die, and then be a whole new group of people that will then come up, and then all of this will start to change or will change. And the thing that I didn't know at the kind of naive age and headspace that I was in is that it's just a whole new crop of those people grew up. That and so it just continues to, it is self-perpetuating. The racism and the white supremacy is. And so I'm feeling this time that maybe with a degree of activism and participation that's going on, that we, and the kind of responsiveness by those in authority and power, and that maybe it will, that we might be witnessing the beginning of some change, some profound change in the notion of what America is.
That was my next question. Is this time different? And if so, why? And you just answered it. But I mean, it is, if you, I don't know, you can go back 400 years if you want. But more recently, the names that we see and the national uprising and anger and outrage. I mean, I don't know what the nation was like in the wake of Emmett Till's murder. But in the wake of Trayvon Martin, and there's a series of names that is way too long that have inspired pretty strong protests, and yet we have slid back into patterns again and again and again. And even after the death of George Floyd, we're seeing more names yesterday, the day before, last week. And I too feel this time is different. I think what you're speaking to is this groundswell of really a new generation asking for accountability, and not just one issue like what's wrong with, say, a police force, but everything.
Yeah.
Everything from my ballet company to my city to, you know, my statue that I walk by to my syrup that I see in the grocery store. I mean, my corporation that I want to put money into to buy whatever I like to buy. And that's that's powerful. And that may be why you're right, that this time is different, but I'm glad you're optimistic, and may you be right.
I'm optimistic because I think it's again, I mean, I think the thing that you're talking about, that it always happens over and over again. I did the Minstrel Show in 1991, and the Minstrel Show was a response to the murder of Yusuf Hawkins in Brooklyn. I don't know if you remember that.
Yep.
And that was one of those moments where I thought, oh, I thought this was dealt with, that we weren't going to have crowds of white people mobs of white people going out and killing Black people. And I go like, how did I felt like that was a kind of a wake up. And so it's just like, I find myself, I don't think it's just white people that slip into complacency. I think Black people slip into complacency as well. You kind of have to constantly, one has to, regardless of your race, you have to, you have to work on yourself. And I think I'm kind of starting to understand this from what I said earlier about the idea of action. If you are in action, then you don't have time to fall back to sleep. You don't have time to forget. It gives you energy to keep going.
I find that dialogues now are happening in a way that they never did before. Mm-hmm. I was listening today to somebody that I've known for 20 years. Basically grew up under, I shouldn't say under, but I was always there in some capacity. And I realized what I had never asked over all of those years. How does it feel to be the only Black person in the room? Do you feel safe in this space? Do you feel protected? Do you feel encouraged and supported by me, by the institution. I never asked it. And I think the answer that I heard was interesting was there was a feeling of, well, I'm in the room, so already that's my lucky part. So I don't have the right to speak up because I was let into the room. And to me, that's sad,
Yeah.
because it says you can come in if you're voiceless.
Yeah.
And you play by the rules of the room and adjust and kind of blend in, which who on this planet wants to blend in? You know, no one should want to, and no one should be made to feel that they would want that. But
Well,
I was gonna, sorry, go ahead.
go ahead. I was just going to say that in some ways my career has kind of been like that. That
Yeah.
I've been led in the room, and I didn't behave the way I was supposed to, and so I think and sometimes it was I paid a price for that, but I think sometimes my behavior was not to a point. It was kind of it was, sometimes I was just being a jerk, but very often I was just I spoke what I believed to be. I mean, I hate to use the phrases already using now. I spoke my truth, like I just, whatever it was, that's what I did. But I don't think for a really long time I was unwilling and unprepared to be the happy Negro. And so I was just unwilling, and so I think it's in terms of, and I don't think one arrives at that place instantly or quickly. Because I think, first of all, that what you are doing, if you find yourself as with the only Black person of one of the few Black people that are in the room, you learn how to negotiate the space. You try to know what's going on. And at some point, I know for myself, I think, what I'm getting from this, is it worth doing these things that were to shut myself up? It's just not.
Yeah, it wasn't good for you.
It's just not,
Yeah.
And I think also, like, being at those elite schools, I saw a lot. I learned a lot of things about how, I'm going to say it this way, it's a horrible way to say it, but how white people are, or certain white people are, about how they operate. There's a certain level of hypocrisy that's kind of embedded into a certain part of white culture. And some of it has to do, my favorite example of that is that when I was at Yale, I might have been there like a week or so. Well, that was the first time I ever got called nigger to my face.
Ugh.
Was there. The other thing that was interesting was about how people would say, I noticed it already, people say, "How are you?" And so I thought they really meant it. And so they did not mean it. So I would start to tell them how I was, and they'd walk away. And then I quickly learned that what I was supposed to say, "Fine, thank you." That's how I was supposed to behave.
Right. Part of what I've been doing in recent weeks is just reaching out to certain people in our institution to just talk with them about race, and in particular, people of color and our Black and brown students. And one thing that feels different for me is that I tell you, done with the greatest respect, but every student that I spoke to has not been afraid to say, "I have some thoughts on where the ballet school that you are the head of can do a better job." Yeah. And I'd like to share those with you.
Well,
and
that's this moment, that's the time that we're in, that people have given themselves permission and are emboldened because of the moment, to actually say what they believe and what they think.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's maybe the key to change is two things: voice is granted, and even in a very flipped power structure. Because, you know, I'm 54 and I'm white and male and I'm head of the ballet school, and I'm talking to somebody who's 17 and a student that wants something that I'm able to offer, and there isn't a complacency in that. There isn't a, you do a wonderful job, thank you so much, the school's amazing. You're doing this wrong, and I tell you in the most respectful way too, but the dialogue is so healthy, and I think it is the vehicle on which change can happen. Is a voice is granted and somebody is listening, and sometimes in that flipped power structure, that's what we need.
Well, I mean, I'm going to say something. I think there's a flaw in what you're saying.
Yeah.
And the flaw is that voice is granted. You actually don't grant the voice.
Right. Right. Thank you.
They take their voice. They speak. And so I think it's like, you kind of have to listen to it, not like you're doing anything, that they are doing it. They are owning who they are, what they believe.
So, yeah. No, thank you, because I'm not a grantor of voice. I can't give that power to somebody. Somebody has to accept their voice and use it. And I think they've self-granted in order to speak. And the world is also open to listening, which is about time.
Well, I mean, one of the things I'm kind of picking up on something from you. And I think, number one, it's okay that you feel, and it seems like you feel a lot of dis-ease with all of this, that it makes you uncomfortable, but you're kind of wanting to and trying to kind of like lean into that and be okay with the fact that you feel uncomfortable. And also I think there is, I want to say, that you don't need to hear from somebody else what needs to be done. I'm asserting that you already know what needs to be done, what you need to do. You don't need affirmation from somebody else that what you're thinking about and what you're doing is okay. You know, you can be engaged in a conversation or dialogue with them, but you really know what needs to be done. I mean, if we just look at PNB on the outside, it just seems wrong. You know what I mean? In this particular context, it seems wrong. And you know that it seems wrong. And that, you know, so the thing that might imply or might suggest to you that there are actions or things that you can do or that you need to do or start to begin to do or part to think about. How do you build, I mean, this word that's going around now around coalitions and stuff because it's election time, but also a coalition inside your own organization that believe the same thing and that you collectively can push those things forward. And that means not just on the staff level, but on the board level as well. And so so I think I want to say I don't normally tell people what they ought to do or should do or like that, but I think that the idea of your actions are led by your beliefs.
Yes,
it's really the point.
Well, I mean, what you're saying is the work is mine to do, and the work is ours to do as an organization. And racism is a white construct, and the deconstruct falls to the people that constructed it. I'm not looking to students to tell me. I want them to be allowed to speak. I want them to make sure that they feel comfortable speaking. I wouldn't want to stand in the way of that, but I also don't want to put the burden on them that tell me how PNB should be fixed. Because that's not their job. That's not anyone's job. That is my job. That's the position that I hold. And it's up to leaders to do that work and to see what can be fixed. And I think listening is a huge part of realizing I didn't know that this was being done incorrectly. I didn't know that this person didn't feel a certain way. So that's where the dialogue is so helpful, because it's just hitting me over the head with my naivete and helping set me straight on what I hadn't done, or what PNB hadn't done or hadn't provided. And I think a great deal of, there were good intentions all along the way. I don't think that was never the problem, but there were some areas, some blind spots that are coming to light now. And for our institution to scrub through and find where we had been blind, where our intentions weren't realized because of certain practices that were in place. The other big thing that we learn is that if a leader has an intention, doesn't mean that everybody who enters the institution shares that intention. That can crop up constantly, where I'm assuming that students have the same belief that I would have in regard to racism or microaggressions, and that's not always the case. So without a dialogue and a reaffirmation of the beliefs of the institution, you are running a risk, because there are new people coming in every single day, and it has to be clear to everybody that walks through the door what your beliefs are, what you stand, and what the consequences are.
Are you trying to not feel the pain of this? Like, you want it fixed, and you want it fixed as quickly as you can so that you can be liberated or free from it?
Do you mean my pain or the pain of people around me?
Yes.
Mine, I know I need to feel my pain. It's part of the process. I've been heading this institution for 15 years. I can't get off easy on this. I have to own this. And, you know, leaders, you have to take what's rough with your smooth sailing, but you have to take what's rough. And to be honest, this is rough, because there are things that I don't like. When I look at Pacific Northwest Ballet, I don't like. I mean, I can see where good work was done, but I can see where it wasn't enough, or it didn't accomplish the results that I hope to, or that we hope to. Yeah, the pain, I think the pain is part of the process of getting there. So I can't shut that out or just change the channel.
Looking at the dancers, which are predominantly white, more than predominantly, that predominantly means predominantly, but like they're overwhelmingly white. Your staff is probably the same from what I see walking around. Your board is like that as well. So then the actions those things, there are remedies in there that, you know, so maybe the thing is like, make it unwhite. You know? I mean, make it unwhite. So the question then becomes, are you willing? And I think this is true for everything. Are you willing to take the heat for the things that you believe in? You know, because you will. I mean, we all get heat, but you kind of have to put it out there. You know, that you want people to come in.
You have a habit with your company too of, I don't think they come as just dancers either.
Yeah.
They come as collaborators. I know some of them fill more than one role in the company, but I really think that you put value into them as people and as artists.
Yeah.
And that's not always the case.
Yeah. And I had a question for you about that, about the dance itself. What kind of dance do you want to produce and present? Do you feel a responsibility to have it be, in addition to being high quality and aesthetically bold and aesthetically relevant, that some of it, if not all, also should be socially conscious, either overtly or subtextually?
So I would say, that's an interesting question for me, because I've always looked at Spectrum Dance Theater as somebody that is using dance to make a statement on a social statement or a racial statement. And I've thought of PNB as this sort of aesthetic place where it hasn't gone into that realm, but I've always known that the possibility was there. And my thinking has changed dramatically in the last 4 weeks about what we're capable of. I don't think we just have to be interesting, innovative, entertaining. I mean, I think there's nothing wrong with those things, but I think there's the possibility for a platform to really say something, and also to express the institution's values and where the institution stands and where there's those artists that you're working with, be it the cellist or the set designer or the dancer. But it's sort of a collective philosophy that the institution can be proud of. I don't want to say I'm not proud of the work that we produced, but there is opportunity there that PNB hasn't necessarily seized.
Yeah.
It's been working in a different realm.
It makes me think about this thing that I've wondered about this for as long as I've been doing what I do. When I first started dancing, my ballet teacher, she was English, and I started taking ballet in Cambridge, Massachusetts. And she used to say that if you can do ballet, you can do anything. You can dance any kind. If you master ballet, you can dance any kind of dance. And I would kind of listen to this and I go, really? But I kind of go, okay. And then I started to think, to deconstruct it a little bit for myself. So she said, ballet is universal. Then that means we need to look at the adaptive part of it. If it really wants to grow and change and evolve, then the more diverse kinds of bodies and people that it can bring in to actually allow the form to evolve and change.
Ballet is such a bastion of tradition, which I don't mean as a compliment necessarily, but you have a generation removed in every teacher that's teaching a ballet class, and they are going back to what they heard as a student 30, 40, 50 years ago. And they really recognize that they need to keep that tradition going. So if this was what their teacher said to them 40 years ago, they're quite likely to repeat it, more likely to do that than to challenge it and to reevaluate it.
All it is just somebody decided that's what it is, and now we kind of buy into that, and that's what we do. So the thing is, like, how can each one of us individually also loosen up our thinking about, how much of the assumption and how much we've internalized aspects of racism and white supremacy into our belief systems without even knowing that that's what we've done, and it manifests itself in what we produce. I think that if there's somebody here in town, she always say, we need to decolonize the body, and she's right. But I think the thing is, there's a kind of consciousness that you can deliberately use those ballet tropes, let's say, and you can use them in a way that's not about that the body has been enslaved by those values, but as a way to actually critique them. And it doesn't have to be, and the critique can be subtle. It doesn't have to be hit you over the head with the critique, but it can be done in a thoughtful, meaningful kind of way.
Well, also, every mold becomes exciting when it's broken. So moving from, that's what I think William Forsythe and George Balanchine did, and I think to some extent Ulysses Dove, was they sprung from traditions, and they, in cases, built on traditions, and in cases rejected traditions and kind of made new traditions or developed new aesthetics, for sure. And it's fertile territory. To see an imitation upon an imitation upon an imitation eventually becomes dull. Yeah. To see the same fifth position decade after decade, ballet after ballet, century after century. But there are ways to adjust the lens through creative artists that becomes fresh again. And luckily, I think you would agree, we live in a community where our audiences and our public, and we have a younger generation of audiences that wants to attend dance performances in our area, and they don't necessarily want what was the aesthetic 30, 40 years ago. I mean, they want to be challenged and they want to go somewhere new. So to not provide that is to create a disservice. Donald Byrd.
Yes, Peter.
Thank you for initiating all the conversations you have, and there have been so many over the years. And you do it from the stage, and you do it in person. Keep doing it.
Yeah. Well, I don't have a choice.
You have a voice, my friend.
Okay, Peter Boal.
All right.
So have a good evening.
All right. Thank you so much.
All right. Bye-bye.